welcome back to Perspectives with Lisette and Martina. That is Lisette. I'm gonna start with her this time. That is Lisette.
Hi.
I'm Martina. And yeah, welcome back. This is our channel here. If Before we get into today's episode, um, we are talking about men hating women and why. Why do men hate women? So, if you have not watched the very first episode or listened to the first episode, we recommend that you go back and do that. Kind of gives you a little opening as to why we wanted to do this series and some of our research and thought process behind it. So, it'd be good for you to kind of, know that as we're going through the next few episodes or so, and subscribe if you have not as well. You can find us on a number of locations, from Facebook to Instagram. We're on iTunes and Spotify as well. So just have to do that plug there. Oh, excuse me. But yeah, so today's episode, we're going to spend some time talking about what does it mean when we say default to male. I think that's kind of what we say, like default to male. Because if you have been listening to this series or listened to our first episode, we are talking a lot about women being invisible. And of course, how does that fall into, like, how does that roll into women or into men hating women? And we are reading this book that we touched on earlier as well. And we'll also link to it down below. But really, in this book, it's the Invisible Women. It talks about, or really, I think, kind of you and I put this, like Lisette, like it defaults to men. And what that means is that, like, generally, just without even thinking, or sometimes thinking about it, yes, everything in this world defaults back to men. We think of history as one. It's just like, so it's just like these different areas where it's kind of inescapable, because when you look at, oftentimes when people are referring to like aldermen, it may not be a man. It could be a woman. When also, I think another one that was touched on in that book is what they were talking about, languages. How, particularly I think for the romantic languages, he and her is distinguished anyway by the type of pronouns that you use and the way that the ending of the word is. But if you don't have that in your language, normally the default is when we're talking about a group of people, it still could be referring back to men.
Yep.
That's what we're going to spend a little time getting into today. So I turn it over to you to
kick us off.
Yeah,
I think as you were talking, you talked about the language. As a Spanish speaker, it happens quite a bit. Like everything defaults to male. Like you could be talking. I think in the book it talks about. I think the example that she gave was, you can have, these women professors who are together, and you would refer to them in Spanish as, las profesoras. But the minute a man comes into that, and a male professor comes in, it becomes like, oh, los profesores. So it's like you automatically, it could just be one man.
One man, that's true.
One man could come in, and it changes. They all have to become the default male version of the word. Like and I think that is sort of an example of what it really means, right? Like us talking about this default male mentality that society has taken. And I actually have the book, and it opens the introduction, which actually is called The Default Male. She starts off with saying, seeing men as the human default is fundamental to the structure of human society, which then in turn is like, she also says it's an old habit and it runs deep. And if you happen to read the book, it goes to showcase even like the thought of like human evolution and how the default kind of thinking of male has impacted that. And in last week's episode, we talked about like how it's so dominant. It's so like, this idea that the male is intrinsic in how women have become invisible by design. It's very true because I think about like one of the things this book, and just in general, this research made me think about is when you think about what men were doing, if you go into like cavemen times and like all these things, it's the men that always are highlighted. They were the hunter. They did all these things, and you don't hear a lot about what women were doing at the time. But the woman, what was the woman doing when the man was gone?
Right.
Taking care of whether it's their family, the village, or whatever. Like they were taking care of everything else. They were making sure that the men had something to come back to. And I was like, I want to know more about what the women were doing, because I know the men were just hunting.
Right. That's all we know. They hunting.
They were hunting.
But who up in there frying it up?
But who was making sure that the children were being taken care of, that, other people in the camp, whatever they were at, like what were they doing? Were they growing things? Were they farming? Were they like fixing the home? Like what were they doing? Like if something went wrong, they had to figure things out, right? Like so it was like, I'm more anxious. Like it made me think of like, now I want to know the women's version of everything.
Yeah, like what did they do? That is
like of everything. Like I want to know from like the beginning, like what was going on with the women, what were they doing? Because we've gotten, history has been told by a male perspective.
Yeah.
And for the most part, a white male perspective.
Yep.
Not for the most part, I think all around is the white male.
Even the ones that want to talk about other cultures.
Yes.
There's a white man talking about a culture that has nothing to do with you.
Yes.
Nothing at all.
So in this whole, I think, idea of, it really spans from the beginning of time. And, I think for me as a Christian, as you all know, I talk about this openly. It's definitely made me think of like, I want to know more about the women in the Bible. I want to go read, and thankfully there's a lot more women leaders in sort of in Christianity and in churches, and women who are starting to really kind of talk about this. There's a book that says Jesus is a feminist.
Yeah, write that one down, girl. You told me about that one.
And the things like I still haven't finished it. I'm gonna finish it. It's on my to-do list to read. But now I'm like, oh, now I want to finish it because I want to reference it now as we're doing this series, these conversations. Because I think there's a lot to be said about, just religion and women, and that's a whole other conversation to be had. But you go back to sort of the stories in the Bible and who's highlighted, it's usually the males. You have sprinkled some stories in there from the women's perspective, but because the Bible was written by man, it's gonna have mostly a male perspective by default, because as we see even from the beginning of time, it just runs deep to have this seeing men as the fundamentals, as sort of the basis for just humanity. And it's like, no. There's two of us here. There's the male and the female. Like it was there from the beginning of time. Like you can't shake that off and just be like, oh no, it's just the male. Like, no, we're over here too. Like you just chose to ignore this whole other half. But yeah, I'll let you kind of respond.
My mind's deep in thought. I got a lot of things running around in it right now because I'm like, I guess a part of me has always wanted to know more about why do men behave the way that they do. And I know there's a lot of psychology that's in that too, which we, not going to get into it from that perspective. But I guess in a way, like, I guess men continuously just dismiss women. And I think it comes down to like, why? Why are you often so dismissive? And I know, of course, it's dominance, it's control, hate, it's a number of things, but it just always like baffles me to like, what is wrong with acknowledging that women have done great things, they are doing great things. Again, in this book, it talks about things from a lot of different perspectives. It's talking even about like um, great composers, who all of us, when we think about the great composers, we're ever going to most think of the well-known male composers. And even myself, even after I have read this book, I said you might can get to it or know it faster than I can, but they name off a bunch of women composers during the same time as some of these well-known male composers. And how, and I may not get this 100% right, but apparently a canon in, I guess, classical music is supposed to be, I guess, a foundation or so like some of the greatest music ever written in classical music. And most of the canons are men, but how some of those canons were written by women. But you don't hear about women when you hear about some of this great classical music. And to me, I'm thinking like, what is wrong with giving anybody, I think, but in this case, women, their acknowledgement? I guess, that's kind of where my head is going. Like, what, like, why is that? I mean, of course, as we're saying, we got the patriarchy, we got capitalism, we got the way that it's always been, it runs deep. But I guess to me, it just always to me, I don't know. It's just, that's what I'm at. I'm really just thinking like, what is wrong? And, Black people say this in a minute, like, we want to give people their flowers now. What is wrong with giving women their flowers and the respect that they deserve, whether it's at a professional level, whether it's a stay-at-home mom, a caretaker, whatever, it's an executive. Like, what is so wrong with women also sharing the spotlight? Because the thing is with women, we're not trying to like, we don't want to tell you what to do. Like, that's not really, I would say for me, I guess speaking from my frame of mind and women that I know in my life, we're just trying to make it from day to day, like everybody else. We may want to get that promotion, we may want to get this house or live here or travel there, but so does everybody. And it's like, we're just trying to get through it like everybody else. And it's really a shame that we have all these obstacles. I can't say that word, but y'all know what I'm saying. Yes, that are just in the way of just like basic things for women. And it's always been that way. And it's almost like, men, we need y'all to help speak up for things. We really do. Because, when you want to speak up about something, you open your mouth in. But I think when it comes to just like, people of color, we need whites to show up for us, because hell, you caused the damage. So come on over here. You come on and work with us. And it's the same thing with this. Men, you have caused the damage. So come over here and work with us. You need to help fix it. And it's so many men don't, and they don't see a problem. Like, it's just, they don't even see a problem at all. It's, and again, it's just like these blinders on. So that's kind of like what's going on in my head right now. It's like that, like, that's what I'm thinking.
I think you bring up an interesting point, because there is that question of like, why are we as women invisible? Why are we not taken into consideration? Why aren't the males, using their male privilege to
held responsible,
held responsible or being allies to women in spaces? And I think it goes back to the world, being designed for them. They don't see a need because they have never had to. They've never had to be like, oh, that's not my concern. I think it go back to what you were talking about. People of color are asking white people to be, hey, like there's a problem, you need to step up. And they're like, there ain't no problem. Like, what are you talking about? Everything is great. We're all good. Like racism doesn't exist. I think it's the same thing with men. They're like, everything's fine. Y'all are in the workforce. Y'all have access to the same things we do. Like, y'all have, you got some rights out here. Like, why y'all want
Why are you
more?
complaining?
Why are you like, what more do you need?
Mhm.
And there is, I think, sort of like these blinders because it's designed for them to have to not to see it. That's why we talk about this invisibility of women, because it has been designed to be that. There isn't, when we talk about sort of why don't we have statistics? Why don't we have data? Because nobody has deemed it important enough.
Nobody cares enough. Nobody cares
to say like, hey, let's put some money into this. I think one of the things that the author talked about, and something that I know about a little bit, is, when it came to heart disease. In some of the later chapters, she talks about like how it was thought of to be such a male, disease, like men, and it's this like dramatic Hollywood heart attack thing that happens, and oh my gosh. But with women, it's so much subtle, the symptoms of a heart attack. Yeah. It could come across as you feeling like you're just getting like a bad flu, or your back might hurt, and it's like you might feel nauseous, and like there's all these things that are very subtle that can mimic other things, and you don't take it seriously. But because there wasn't a lot of research being done into heart disease in women, and how it impacts women and all these things, it didn't raise the profile until just maybe, I don't know, less than 20 years ago, maybe, I think what was said, where it was like, so it's just like you said, like it's not important for people to see women, even though we're a whole half of the society, like,
and we bring life into this world. That's like, we give birth. I mean, I know not every woman can give birth, but that is one of the primary things a woman's body is aimed to do. Yeah, not everybody, but that's the primary thing. We bring life into the world, yet you have little to no consideration for women. Yeah.
And I think I know I shared with you conversation that I had with a friend when I shared with them the title, and I don't remember how we got into this conversation, but we got into the conversation and I said something of like, man, you're really not gonna like our next episodes that we're gonna be coming out with. And they asked me like why, and I was like, I just like, look, all I'm gonna tell you is gonna be the title, and I'm not gonna go into the nuances of what we're gonna be talking, because I want you to listen and have the opportunity to react to it first time. And all I said was men hate women. And it was an instant sort of, that's not true. That is a lie. It's the other way around. It's women hate men. And I was like, excuse me? I was like, what makes you think that? Like, and I wasn't prepared to get into a conversation. Like, if y'all been following, y'all know I'm an introvert, and sometimes I just need a little bit of time to gather my thoughts. And I was in the middle of just kind of reading the book and like all these things. But the fact that the reaction was so strong of like, there is no way that is true. Like that is false. It's the other way around. Just made me realize how important it was for people to see and hear about this. Like, no, like, and I was, because we got into this whole thing of like, because I said like, the world is designed for you. Like, do you not see that? And then he came back with like, well, of course, who designed it? I was like, and that's what I was like, you know what? I'm not gonna have this conversation right now.
Yeah, he wasn't getting it. It was.
I'm not. We're not gonna embark on this. And I think that is part of the problem, that men for the most part are like, well, we're the ones that have designed it. We were the ones that were engineers. We were the ones that were in construction. We're the ones that, this. I'm like, because women were designated to be this. Mm-hmm. We weren't told that we could be engineers, or we could be scientists, that we can be, astronauts, that we can be doctors. Like, we weren't told these things. Mm-hmm. We were told, and the education systems and everything, when they were being put together, were designed for women to go into, like, well, we're going to teach them home ec.
I was going to say home ec, that damn home ec.
We're going to teach them to, like, knit and sew and all these things that were regulated to women. But it's like, those are life skills. Like, I'm sorry. Cooking, cleaning, all the things, like, those are just life skills.
Yep.
Some of us want to have those life skills. Other of us are like, you know what? We live in a day and age where we can have things delivered to us, or we can get people to, clean our houses. Like, there's all these things, but it's like, those are basic life skills. Like, how we all should be learning how to cook and bake and sew and clean and do laundry and all those. Like, we should all have the basic knowledge of that. Everything else is something that we can be taught, that both men and women can be taught. And I think that's that whole idea, that default male of like, no, but that's a male industry. Like, that's what men should be doing. Or that's just, that's just the way men are. Men are built to like be in construction. Women are not. I was like, you don't know that. Like, you are basic enough of your thing because you haven't seen women in construction, but there could be. There probably are. I don't know any, but I know there are. They're out there and they want to, like, and the whole idea of like, well, why? I remember one of the things that I had, my friend was like, well, why aren't women in like STEM positions? I was like, I'm like, because, but it not in like large numbers. He was just saying like, well, why aren't there more? Okay. And I was like, because it isn't until recently that there's been a push for women to be told that they can be in those fields.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's going to take time, like, because none of us were exposed. I mean, our education system needs a whole...
the United States...
The whole other topic.
Oh, Lord. Yeah.
But I mean, we weren't... It isn't... I mean, probably I think within the last 10 years, I've seen so many more like STEM programs geared towards young girls and young women, and really like starting them younger. I was like, but that wasn't there 20, 30 years ago.
It's not encouraging that.
We're behind on a lot of these things because everything, those kind of industries, those kind of careers, things, they were all geared towards men. Girls were like, oh, go be a nurse. Go be a teacher.
Yeah,
go be a librarian.
Yeah. Right.
Like there's all these like things that women were told they should be doing. And I think, again, this default male mentality has men now thinking like, well, that's what you should be doing. Like, that's your role. Like, I don't, why do you think that we hate you? And I was like, because either consciously or subconsciously, you kind of do.
You kind of do. Yeah.
I was like, you kind of do. And you're just not realizing it, because even the design of a phone, of our cell phones, are from a male perspective. It's like, for the most part, I think the book even goes into it. Like, for the most part, women have smaller hands. And I remember when the phones were smaller, I loved the smaller sort of like, I'm an Android, I'm a Samsung person over here. My co-host over here is not. It's an Apple person. And it's fine. That's how we coexist.
We can coexist.
But I remember liking the smaller phones. Mm-hmm. And I hated when the bigger phones started, and they become the default. They have become the default thing. And nobody is and even if you get a smaller phone, like if you do, they're not as well made. They don't have the same like process. There's all these things that are, but it's because who is designing these? Who is being like, who is the intended audience for these phones? It's men. It's not women. because bigger is better, and that's a mentality that's definitely a male mentality.
Amen.
I'm like, no, I want a phone. Like, my mom does not want any new phones because she's like, they're too big.
They are gigantic nowadays. They're huge. Even iPhones. I mean, they have, I'll come back to this, but they did have a smaller one that they have brought back. But most of them are just getting bigger and bigger.
But even if the smaller one they bring back, it's not at the same processing speed. Some of the things aren't as good as the bigger phones. Like the camera might not be as good. The things that you kind of buy your phone for to like use, and things like, they're not there. And I think that that's important to notate, that even the design of things defaults to male.
Yep.
And there's some great examples about, like the phone being one of them. But one of them that caught my attention was around the bathrooms.
Oh yeah, use your best.
I think I mentioned a little bit about it in last week's episode, but it was like talking about how like, oh, they want to have like equal access to bathrooms or something like that, sort of the mentality when they're designing it, but without realizing that with men you can have multiple urinals, that don't take up a lot of space, but with women you have to have stalls, so they take up more space. And I was like, I remember having one of those like aha moments of like, I was like, I never thought about the inequality when it comes to bathrooms and how there's always long lines. And I'm like, well, why don't they just make the women's bathrooms bigger? Well, because of course, how could you do that? How can women have more bathrooms than men? Like, it has to be equal access. And I'm like, and there's that whole mentality of like, no, there's more women. It's not that there's more women. It's just that you can only have stalls for women. Like that's all. So of course, it's gonna take more space. Just make them bigger. And it made me think about an office design that was happening, and in this office is primarily, there's a lot more women than men in this office. And when they got into like the bathrooms and they saw the bathrooms, they saw there was only 3 stalls in the women's bathroom.
It's in the book?
No. This is me.
This
is a story of mine. This is my story, because I know of an office that's like this. They were designing the office like from a blank slate.
Okay.
They were designing the office from the blank slate, and at the end of it, there was only 3 stalls for women, even though the office is primarily women. Like, there's more women than men. I remember like and it reminded me of that story. Like, when I was reading that part of the bathrooms, I was like, maybe, I'm like, probably a man was in charge of designing this.
Had to, because that's
stupid. And I was like, and that was it. Like, the bathroom was like, and I didn't hear, I don't know what the male's bathroom is designed or what the situation is, but like, it was just like hearing about like how women were like, well, there's only 3 stalls, but there's like, I mean, you're talking about maybe like 30 women in this office or something like that, whereas, predominantly women who are in this office. I was like, and it's like, I was like, that is so interesting. Like, to have the ability to design from a blank slate, and you choose to just have 3 stalls for women and see no issues with it. Like, I didn't, like, when I was hearing the story the first time, and it was before I obviously read the book or anything, but now it just brought that back to mind of like, yep, when you think about designing, definitely people are not thinking about women and what they need. And because I was like, I bet you anything the lighting is terrible. Like, to think, and
if y'all only had 3 bathrooms, then I'm concerned about everything else too. 3 bathrooms.
And I also know that, and this I think comes again to design being default male, and who probably was designing this was a male, or if there was a woman, is a woman who maybe never had kids, because there was no, in the design, there was no thought about women who were having kids and would need a place to go in, and pump.
Pump. Yeah.
There was no room. That I was told came after the fact. Like they had to then put it was already designed, everything, and they were like, well, there's no room for the women who've had, who've recently had babies. They need a place to pump. They need a private place, ideally with a door that locks. And that has, privacies, like you can't, all of that came after the fact. That was what I was told. And I was like, and it just made me think, like, that portion of the book and just thinking about design, like it made me think, like, yeah, people aren't thinking about the different state.
That's where men would be like, but you want to be equal though.
I was like, why? Oh, and why? This is what makes me so upset, because I'm like, why can't you think about us?
Exactly. Like what?
Why this sort of not having consideration for women, for the different stages that women go through, and the different, life kind of opportunities that come our way, whether it's having kids, thinking about, being caretakers, like this whole thing that comes to thinking about design of the world, and then just the default maleness of it. Why can't you just take us into consideration? Like, fine, if you want to go with the argument that, like, well, we're the ones that designing it, we're the ones, then you're being a jerk for not thinking about me.
Yeah.
You said it better, but you know me.
I know you. But it's true in instances, because there are a lot of instances where they talk about things as it relates to work and like the design. There was an instance, I think it was the woman who wrote Lean In, she talked about her experience at Google, where it wasn't until she was pregnant in this like 100-space parking lot. Yeah. There was no parking for women who are pregnant, and which is normally had been fine because she was not pregnant. She hadn't thought about it. But when you're pregnant, your body's going through so many changes. Your feet might hurt every day. Your back hurts, whatever situation may be. And she's having to park so far away just to come into work. And she literally had to go to, I think it was one of the creators of Google, and was like, we need parking for pregnant women. And he like immediately got on it. But if she wouldn't have said anything, would this have ever changed? And I think it also mentions in the book that's like offices who want to have these modern, sleek designs don't always take into effect women either. Because I think they're talking about see-through stairs. Yeah. Women have to walk up these stairs and may have a dress on or a skirt on.
Never thought about that. It never crossed my mind.
It never crossed my mind until I was like, that's so true. Like these small things that are not really small, but they can make a big difference.
It's a default to the male.
Default to the male. It was like, oh, well, you know what? You're so right. Clear stairs may not work because you wear a dress.
Clear floors. I've seen clear floors in some places, and I never
like it's, and it's so interesting that it's like, for a world that doesn't think much about women, they surely will charge and tax the hell out of us for these things. Ooh. I mean, we've all heard of like the pink tax. Charge because you have a menstrual cycle, when that's really just another.
That happens.
It's life.
It's life.
It's gonna happen.
I have no choice in it.
You don't have a choice, but we're gonna charge you more money just because we can. We have no one enforcing us and telling that we shouldn't or that we don't have to. So we're just gonna do it. Female deodorant, female razors, anything really geared towards women, we're paying more for
it. I've stopped like buying, like if I ever buy a razor, like I'm like, no, I'm not buying I'm not buying one that's geared towards female, because the male one does the exact same thing and it's cheaper. So
yep,
whatever. But again, it goes back to this idea that you get punished kind of for being a woman in this society. Like you get penalized, and it's seen, whether it's the taxes, whether it's just prices being higher, whether it's just the design of our, communities, the transportation, things aren't being, thought of for women, and it just defaults again to this male thing. And because everything defaults to male, and whether it's the design, whether it's just um the convenience for men to go about their lives, that to me is what kind of goes into this subtle hate towards women. Because the minute we bring up an issue, right, the minute women are like, hey, this isn't working for us, like this isn't designed for us, this isn't helping us, it's making it harder for us, because it now inconvenience a man, or it may inconvenience a man, but nobody really knows if it will or not, because nobody's really actually putting thought into how do we change this. Just the mere thought of it is like, oh, women always have to be being an issue, always being a problem. I was like, we wouldn't be having this problem if you had thought about us in the first place.
Exactly. So you took the words right out of my mouth. And that's why I was like, men get so bent out of shape. I'm like, what have you been out of shape for? Like, and it's a part of this whole discussion, because they're so blinded that the world is created for them, by them, that they can't see anything else. Everything else is for anybody else's inconvenience. Mm-hmm. Because they live in this bubble of everything being readily available, or well, why can't I do that? And well, she gets to do that. Why can't Lord have mercy? It's almost sometimes like dealing with an 8-year-old. Just like, grow up. Shit. You want to be a grown man so bad. Like, grow up. Oh.
Do it. Just be a grown man.
Just be a grown man. Like, it's okay.
But it is. It's and again, like, to go back to sort of making that connection of like that, men hate women, whether you are overt about it, but I think these are subtle ways, like a simple thing of like not being thought of to make sure that there's rooms where women can go and pump, after they come back from maternity leave. Even the idea of having maternity leave and have it paid, that we don't have that in this country. For a country who values the life of the unborn.
So damn bad.
I mean, the fact that, just that, I can't, because I'm so heated, I can't even take the words out of my mouth, because it makes me so upset, because it's like, you can't even take into consideration what we would need after we bring life into this world. Because the only thing that mattered to you as a man, because let's be honest, a lot of our legislators and who made these are men for the most part. There's not a lot of women out there. All you cared about was making sure that you could control women. That's it. Like, that's your intent. And then the women who vote against their own interests, they are so lost in this male patriarchy. They are so lost in it. Then they're just so ingrained into thinking that they are less than, that they will vote against their own interests, into things that will benefit them, that will benefit the women in their lives, whether it's daughters, nieces, friends, moms. Like,
that is not women supporting women.
But it goes back to this idea that there is this subtle hate towards women, towards being a woman. So there's women out there who may not love being a woman because
how the world is set up, the design, every damn thing. That is
so
true.
You try to like seek that male, approval, and I think we've talked about this in the context of race and ethnicity, of like wanting that proximity to whiteness, because there's privileges that come to having that proximity. I think the same could be said about having that proximity to the maleness in our society, and to sort of this thing by women who are like, they're there are maybe some I don't know what this privilege is. I'm not seeking no proximity to maleness. If you know something, if you're listening and you've heard about this, and maybe there's something out here that we haven't seen, if there's some studies or papers or something around this proximity to like maleness or whatever, like let me know, because I'm not seeking it. I don't want it.
Yeah, and it's, to me, it sounds strange. I'm gonna just say it. It sounds strange because now, for people of color who might be seeking proximity to whiteness, that to me, I could see the advantages, unfortunately, if those advantages work for you. But I see what you're saying. A woman might could see the advantages of that with a man, or that proximity, but I just don't think men even thinking about it. Like, they don't, because the thing is, like,
I think this is a woman who wants to be accepted into whatever industry they're in, and that they kind of will compromise or vote against.
In terms of politicians.
Yeah.
Okay. I was talking about just women in general.
No. I was like more of like politicians.
Maybe. I still think they'll probably never respect you or see you as one of them. But I can get that.
I'm thinking more of like the political realm, because that's really where we see a lot of that happen, where you're like, how can you as a woman support that? Like, like I just, nothing to me, nothing explains it, whether it's a proximity to something, whether it just because you're taking away a choice for the women in your life who may want it. You might not want it.
You may not, right.
But don't take that away from someone who wants to have that choice.
And it's, for me, I think one of the biggest things is like, for women who have voted against abortions, if a woman has been raped, like, so basically you voted with the men, because most of it's primary men who are saying this, like, I don't care what happened to you, you can't get an abortion. But I think particularly for women, because women can know what it's like to carry a child and to be pregnant, even if you don't have children, you can still know what that's like. So you're basically saying, even if a woman has gone through one of the most traumatic things in her life, you wouldn't support an abortion. That's all I'm gonna say on that.
But I think it just brings a whole other topic to explore, I think, in the future of, the choices and then the decisions that women make because of this society and this world that really has made us have to look through a male lens and have to think through that default kind of male that this episode is kind of talking about. So I think it's something that we can definitely explore more in the future around this, because there's definitely a lot more to be said about the default male in our society and what it continues to look like. So if you have any thoughts, you are our listeners and our followers, you have any thoughts about this, let us know. Reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. Love to kind of know what your thoughts are, whether you agree with us or not. Like, please let us know. And we definitely want to have continue having an open conversation around this. If you are a male and you listen to this, let us know what you think. What did you learn anything new? Did you think about anything differently? And if not, like, why not? What let us know. We're definitely a judgment-free zone where we're not out here to put anyone on blast, but we definitely want to have that conversation. But we'll be back with some more conversations around men hate women, and what that looks like from our perspectives and from what we've kind of gleaned from this book, Invisible Women, that we're both reading and wanted to share with you all. So please tune in next time.
Yeah.
Bye.